From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Sandy Johnson will talk about the advantages of pregnancy staging cows and heifers this summer. Knowing when a female has settled can be valuable management information, she says. We'll get into that in a moment. Following then, K-State's Jaymelynn Farney and Blasi. They'll discuss what the online beef basis tool can do for you producers in making calf feeding and marketing decisions post-weaning. Today's wheat harvest update features Extension crop production agent Sandra Wick of the Post Rock Extension District in north central Kansas. And later, K-State's Charlie Lee will talk about controlling excessive cattail growth in farm ponds. All that coming up on this Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks for tuning in for this Tuesday edition of Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. Well, today we've a selection of topics for you beef cattle producers, and starting with the idea of pregnancy staging for the spring calving herd. Now, what is that exactly, and what does that entail for you producers? Well, we'll cover all of that now with Sandy Johnson joining us. Sandy is a research and extension beef specialist for K-State based in northwest Kansas, and she recently authored an article on this very subject in the Beef Tips newsletter series. So, Sandy, this revolves around preg checking those bred cows and heifers, or hopefully they're bred, at a point earlier perhaps than weaning time, and there are reasons for doing this, you say.
Right. You know, I'm an impatient person, and I really want to know sooner than calving if I have a pregnant cow. And what you find is once you have a little bit of information, sometimes more information becomes more valuable to you. And so when we think about a year like we're having in western Kansas, when it's dry and we're not sure how far our pasture's going to go and what adjustments we might need to make, having more information about when that cow became pregnant, not only is she pregnant, but when she became pregnant, you know, those calves that will be born early are going to pay more of the feed bill than those that are coming later. And so barring other information on which cows we want to keep, and of course, you know, most everybody has a list of, oh, she really made me unhappy this calving season. She's going to find a new place to live after this year. Well, so you have that list, but then knowing which of these cows are pregnant early would certainly be the type of cow I wanted to keep if it came to having to reduce the size of my cows to deal with drought. And that's reduce the size of the cow herd, I don't want to get into cow size.
Right. But irrespective of the weather conditions, even if you're operating in an area where drought isn't so pressing, this approach can be worthwhile to the producer from an economic standpoint on down the line.
Right. You know, there's a number of marketing opportunities that might come along depending on what your program is, and one of those might be identifying AI-sired calves. We know that heifers that are pregnant to an AI sire, typically you look at some of those data, $150 to $200 more that they're worth. So making sure that you stage and determine when that female got pregnant can be worth a lot of money. Another step would be to determine fetal sex. Mm-hmm. That requires a higher level of skill and a shorter window to do that. But, you know, if I was going to buy some replacement heifers, well, if they were all pregnant to heifer calves that are going to be smaller than bull calves at birth, well, that might be worth another something to me. Now, we don't have enough, I can't tell you what that's, any market test of that, but there are people doing that to add value to those heifers that they do market.
And so we're to that term that you just cited there, and that is staging, which means identifying when those females became pregnant. And that gets into methods of pregnancy detection that can be employed. And there are options of going about this, Sandy.
Right. We've traditionally had rectal palpation as a method to determine if a cow is pregnant and when. It's a more coarse measure. You'd be surprised at how much variation there is in fetal growth as you try and palpate and say that this vessel is this big, so it has to be this stage, or cotyledons are this big. Well, it gets you in the ballpark, but not nearly as specific. It also takes a lot of repetition in the stages of pregnancy, or so the time periods in pregnancy that you want to try and differentiate. If all you do is yes, new pregnant when they're over 150 days of pregnancy, you'll have a challenge trying to differentiate between some of the shorter-term pregnancies if that's not what you've got experience in. Our dairy practitioners that routinely are checking at 30, 35 days, boy, they have that down, and, they're very good in that short-term range. So it depends on the skills we have and what you get exposed to develop those skills, but still a very good tool if we want to do the best job of staging those, trying to say which cows were pregnant first, second cycle, and so on, would be when those pregnancies are still under 100, 110 days. If you have a longer arm, you can go closer to 120 days, but I have a short arm, so I'm saying that 100 to 110 days.
Depends on the level of accuracy one is seeking here, though, and if one wants to take the next step up, ultrasound is a possibility here?
Yes, ultrasound is a great tool, and the nice thing is that more and more of our practitioners can now offer that service. Like any technology, the costs have come down, and so they've got some more options that allow more of our veterinarians to have those. And the nice thing about ultrasound is that when we go in with that ultrasound, we can see as early as 25 to 28 days that we have a pregnancy, and we can also see the fetal heartbeat. And, with other methods of detection, we can't detect that heartbeat and that true knowledge that today we have something viable because, unfortunately we do lose pregnancies. So I like that, and I'm also just one that is so fascinated by watching ultrasound of fetuses of various sizes that I can watch that for a long time because it's just so bloomin' cool. That's why I'm a reproductive physiologist. I guess that's what that boils down to. But as compared to another tool we have that could test early, and that's using a commercial blood test. The commercial blood test is essentially measuring a protein that's produced by the placenta. And so that protein, number one, it's going to hang around after calving. So you couldn't test an animal 60 days after calving with a blood test and know whether she's pregnant or not because the level may still be from calving. So when we take a blood sample one day, we know that we've waited long enough after calving, so we've timed this appropriately, which generally isn't a problem, but you need to recognize that. She may not be pregnant today. She perhaps was pregnant yesterday, but not today. So the ultrasound allows us to see the fetal heartbeat that day. We know viability, whereas the blood test has that disadvantage. And the second downside with the commercial blood test is we can't make a decision right there while she's in the chute. They're trying to get that to be more of a chute side rapid test, but it's not there yet.
It takes a few minutes to get those results, correct?
Right. Most people would still send them off to a lab. You can get a kit, but it takes 20-some minutes to run that test once you have the samples collected, and you're not going to collect one sample, go do a 20-minute test, come back, bleed the next cow. You're going to collect all those samples first. So if cow still isn't in the chute while you're learning the answer to the yes/no pregnancy.
Well, those are the alternatives here, but does one need to account for as well the actual costs of administering these various options here, Sandy? Is there a big difference there?
Well, I think people might be surprised how little difference there is. It's always hard to talk about costs that involve some economies of scale, whether it's buying needles and test tubes to do a blood sample, or a veterinarian is likely going to charge somebody more to come and ultrasound 20 cows than 200. Mm-hmm. So there's that part of it. But, I think for the mid-range size producer, whatever that is, to find that there's not as much difference in cost by the time you put all the costs in there between these technologies. So the palpation is probably still the least expensive, which should make sense in that our highest level of technology there is disposable sleeves and rectal palpation. So that's going to be somewhat cheaper, but you don't get perhaps the precision and depth of information, depending on the experience and the staging, that you might be able to get with, say, ultrasound.
But the main message here is that staging those pregnancies has value to the producer, and you would certainly encourage producers to at least give that due thought.
Right. And, Eric, you just think about the situation where, God forbid, somebody has a wreck for whatever reason.
Right.
Well, if you're going to have 60% of your cows open, when do you want to know that?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible, that's right. And when you can look at your calving distribution before the calves hit the ground, that's the way I like to have it.
Well, producers, we would direct you toward that article that Sandy has put together on this very subject in the recent Beef Tips newsletter on opportunities and options for pregnancy staging for the cow herd. And have a look at that, ksubeef.org. Sandy, we appreciate you sharing all of this with us. Many thanks. We'll talk again soon.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Sandy Johnson, Research and Extension Beef Specialist for K-State. She's based in Northwest Kansas. We'll have more on Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
Next up on Agriculture Today, a closer look at a cow-calf management tool that we've alluded to numerous times on this broadcast, found on K-State's agmanager.info website. And you producers very well may find this tool advantageous to your management. It's the topic of a recent podcast hosted by K-State Beef Systems Specialist Jaymelynn Farney and featuring K-State beef nutritionist Dale Blasi.
Dale, what is this tool I asked you to talk about, and what can it do for producers?
Well, Jaymelynn, the tool that we're specifically visiting about today is called Beef Basis, and it can be found online at beefbasis.com. It was developed about 15 years ago by many of the team members that are in the Department of Agricultural Economics. And in a nutshell, what Beef Basis allows you to do is to project out a lot of various aspects, predict basis for your beef cattle, also for looking at value of gain, which is in and of itself, it's very valuable to determine potential profitability, cost of production, and so forth. And I often joke with Dr. Glenn Tonzer over in Ag Econ that if an animal nutritionist can use it, then certainly many of our beef producers, both cow, calf, and stocker, can certainly leverage this tool to help them make many decisions as they grow their calves.
So, Dale, what type of cattle producers can benefit? You already kind of mentioned, but who is this tool designed for?
Well, Jaymelynn, I believe it's really applicable to everybody across all sectors of our beef industry. Cow-calf producers certainly can get a hold of this and get an idea on what they think their calves will be worth at certain times of the year. And the beautiful thing about this particular tool is that there's many states represented in the drop-down menu specific to auction markets, that the value of this program can basically look at the feeder cattle futures and the corn futures price, and that's all built into the futures projection of value for these animals.
So we're going to kind of talk through maybe some examples. So if you were a stocker producer, what information do you need to be able to put into the tool to be able to generate some kind of values to help with your decision?
Well, typically what I do when I utilize this tool is there's drop-down menus for the buy date. You cannot go back into the past. You go forward, but you have a drop-down menu for a buy date. And then you can look at your sell date. So for many of our grass stalker producers that have purchased cattle in the spring of the year, they can reach into the future, into the fall, and look at, the gain of their cattle that they can attain. If they need to feed additional nutrition to their cattle to hit a higher level of gain, or to use an average grass average date of the gain, they can project out what the value of those cattle are. So the location within the state, which is in the auction market, and specific for Kansas, this database utilizes the auction markets in Salina, Pratt, and Dodge City. Then you put in the gender of the calf that you're looking at. This opportunity allows you to look at, say, steers, heifers, or bulls, frame size of the calf, the muscling of the calf, the buy weight of the calf, the sell weight. So if you're purchasing a 6-weight calf going to grass and you're going to project it's going to come off weighing somewhere in the vicinity of 800 pounds, you put that number in. And then the number of head, because of previous work being done with numbers of calves, that being the lot size, we know that the greater the draft of calves, the greater the value. But you're able to put in the number of head. And basically, the values are generated off of the reference contracts based upon the months that you've inputted, and it gives you a value of gain. And with those numbers that are generated, I'm able to go back with nutrition cost of gain and look at, can I achieve a certain level of performance given the value of gain that's evident and what is left over in that margin for my labor and, of course, my return to management.
And so you said that the future number is kind of based off of some contract numbers. Do they subtract out some basis based on your location? Is that why this is named beefbasis.com?
That is correct. I mean, they went back and pulled historical basis information. There's actually a drop down in the data. And you could look at the market data, the historical basis, location comparison, year comparison, and in the analytics drop down, they got a basis based on 8-week, 16-week, 24-week hedge analysis. There's a lot in there that a person can use with some basic knowledge of marketing.
Now, in a webinar that you had recorded back June 4th, that you can find the recording of the webinar on the ksubeef.org webpage, and you can see some of the drop-down images that Dr. Blasi had used in that discussion. But in that discussion, you had gave an example from a cow-calf producer, especially if we're looking at maybe some dry conditions needing to early wean. And you talked about changing your average daily gain based off of forage quality and looking at should you market your calves in August, September, or October. Can you go ahead and maybe talk about that? I know it might be a little difficult without visuals, but explain how a producer could use that.
Well, of course. Long story short, I use the stalker value of gain that is located in the drop-down menu of the analytics. And, I assumed a calf birth weight of 80 pounds, a calf born in the early part of February. And typically we'll anticipate a weight per day of age around 2 pounds. And so a producer is able to project forward the weight of those calves. If we incur drought, much like the western part of our state, certainly into the eastern region of Colorado and northern New Mexico, a lot of people have to make the decision if they destock their pairs or if they early wean. And so helping producers ascertain the probability or the value of early weaning their calves and trying to achieve greater value capture, market capture, as opposed to keeping them longer. And this tool, this stocker value of gain, allows you to put in an average daily gain, the earliest out date. So if you got a calf born early February, you start to look at these trigger dates, such as, say, July 1, August 1, September 1, October 1, and you put the gender of the calf in, the earliest out weight, say 450 pounds, and again, your state and your location, and it will essentially tell you what the value of these calves are with the progression of the date that we're looking at.
And so in your example that you talked about in that webinar, you said overall, and up until a traditional weaning, we always say about 2 pounds average daily gain per day of age. But you kind of used a little bit higher number while grass was good and green, and then a little lower average daily gain towards the end in your projections.
Yes, that's correct. I assumed on native grass that with moving in from, say, the middle part of June, certainly into August, September, and October, the grass quality is going to decline. And with that, without any protein supplementation and also the reduction in milk production from the cow, I actually calculated in and I accounted for that. When it was all said and done, it was around 2 pounds per day of age. But I varied it, I believe, from 2.2 down to 1.7, 1.6 pounds of weight gain per day for these calves. And you need to be realistic. And, many producers know the historical average of their weaning weights, and they can adjust that accordingly by 20, 30, even 50 pounds based upon the environmental conditions that their animals have encountered. So this tool allows you to look into the future, take into account what the anticipated future value of these animals are worth, and be able to make some strategic decisions on marketing. I mean, if we're encountering a drought situation, we know that with reduction in forage availability that we're going to see body condition scores start to suffer and everything that goes along with that, Jaymelynn. So being able to maybe early wean and hopefully spare some of that body condition from the removal of the lactation energy requirement. There's some long-term type things that producers can look at with this tool to kind of give them some perspective for the future.
The main purpose of the talk today is just to bring to mind, as cattle producers, we need to quit just being very passive and accept whatever we can get. We need to start looking into making some strategic marketing decisions, some strategic times to make some managerial changes, all to drive profit.
K-State's Jaymelynn Farney and Dale Blasi. Beefbasis.com is the direct link to that tool, also accessible at agmanager.info. And you can hear the entire podcast by searching for Dr. J's Beef. This is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today continues now. Eric Atkinson with you and with yet another Kansas wheat harvest report, and this time on harvest progress and activity in the Post Rock Extension District. Now that covers 5 counties in north central Kansas, namely Smith, Jewell, Mitchell, Lincoln, and Osborne counties. The Extension Crop Production Agent covering that district is with us now, Sandra Wick. Sandra, generally speaking, you note that the harvest this year is considerably later than normal.
Yes, that's correct, Eric, and that's kind of due to, the majority of our wheat up here in north central Kansas is behind soybeans. So that's, right out of the gate. They're starting out kind of later planted, and, we had some limited growth in the fall. Although we did get some moisture in the early spring that kind of got people's hopes up. We got some growth on it, but then we had those 3 freeze events that pretty much knocked back a lot of the primary tillers, and then the secondary tillers came back, but then the moisture shut off, and then we were in like a moderate drought when it was grain filling. So this old wheat has really gone through kind of a rough time this year.
Well, that as the setup then, how far along is cutting, working from south to north in your district?
We'll start at the southern part of the district, which is more Lincoln, Mitchell, and maybe southern Osborne County. We're about 75 to 80% completed about this time. It started around the 3rd week of June. In the northern counties, we're only maybe about half done. They didn't get a lot of the wheat harvested before we got those rains in the last part of June. But we're progressing as much as we can at this point.
Right. Well, then, as you look across the district, what are the yield reports looking like?
Okay, we pretty much, had predicted, the southern part of the district, they got their wheat in just a little bit more timely. We got all that rain last fall, and so they were struggling to get that wheat in, but the southern part of the district got theirs in. We're seeing maybe averages 30s to maybe as high as in the 50s. Because, like I said, they got planted a little bit more timely. They got a little bit more fall growth on it, so that really helped those yields. In the northern part of the district, they were pretty much struggling. I've heard yields all over the board, 15, up to maybe 50, but it just really depended on when it was planted and when that moisture was received, as if it was received more the timely rains.
Now, you've mentioned there have been harvest time rains in the district. In fact, some extraordinarily heavy amounts in some isolated locations. So is that impeding test weight?
Yes, it did. Before, there was quite a bit of the wheat cut in the southern part of the district before the rains. And, those test weights were up 62, 63, 64. And, of course, after the rain, it decreased to 57, 60 pounds. Whereas in the northern part of the district, they really didn't get much harvested before that rain. So their test weights, it's probably a little bit lower than average. Generally, we're around 60 or better, and these are running in, 58 to 60 pounds.
Of course, Sandra, lower yields often translate into higher protein contents. Is that what's happening in your district?
Yep, that's what we're finding. The averages probably are running 12 to 14% protein, and, that's what the millers like is the higher protein. So it's too bad that that's kind of what goes along the lower yield, the higher the protein.
As far as diseases that might have afflicted the crop in those 5 counties, did you have much of that kind of pressure there?
We really did not. We thought there was going to be the Fusarium Heb blight because the climate conditions maybe set that up for that, but none of the elevators or any of the counties around have reported any Fusarium Heb blight or that head scab. So that's a good thing, and hope that keeps up.
You bet. All in all, you hope to be finished with harvest, at least in your northernmost counties, maybe within a week if the weather is cooperative?
I would say that's true. If we get some, continued good weather, not that we don't want the moisture for the soybeans and the corn and the milo, but I think that farmers are just ready to get the 2020 wheat crop in.
All right. Well, Sandra, thanks for the recap.
All righty. Thanks so much, Eric, and you have a great day.
You as well. Sandra Wick, Crop Production Extension Agent for the Post Rock Extension District, again, Smith, Jewell, Mitchell, Lincoln, and Osborne counties in north central Kansas, with today's wheat harvest update. And now this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I want to visit with our Kansas dairy industry concerning National Ice Cream Day. Might remember, at least some of you might remember, that in 1984, President Ronald Reagan declared that the third Sunday of July should be National Ice Cream Day. So this year, July 19th, will be the National Day of the ice cream cone or the bowl of ice cream or just whatever kind of ice cream you enjoy eating. Actually, the United States actually leads the world in ice cream consumption, We consume more ice cream per capita than any other country in the world. And it's kind of interesting that probably about 98% of the people that live here in the United States actually consume ice cream, at least from time to time. So where did ice cream come from? How was it developed? Well, if you look back and dig into the history, you'll find that it actually likely originated back in China. It didn't look anything like the ice cream that we enjoy today, but it did contain some milk product in that, but some other things as well. And that dates back to before the year 1000. So a long, long time ago. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes since. Some interesting other things you might want to think about is, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? It's kind of interesting. There was a survey done last year, and it gives us some interesting data. Those people that were 14 to 17 that took the survey, they preferred mint chocolate chip. Those in the 18 to 24-year-old category, cookies and cream. 25 to 34, cookie dough. Anybody 35 and older, they preferred chocolate. Interesting. As you look at that, obviously, you may have a different flavor than those that I discussed. So, why do I bring this up to our Kansas dairy industry? This is an opportunity for you to celebrate something with the dairy industry. Again, you might think of some things. You can shop the ice cream sales and share it with your family. Maybe you enjoy making your own ice cream, so that might be something that you can do. You can also visit one of your local ice cream outlets. Whether you do something on your own farm or at your own house, or whether you do something downtown, take some friends with you. I think it's important that we share our industry, and we share one of the sweetest things about the dairy industry, ice cream. So remember, July 19th will be the National Day of Ice Cream. So enjoy that with your friends. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Agriculture Today is back now, and on we go to this week's Wildlife Management segment with Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Charlie, you're going to inform us today about ways of dealing with cattail growth in farm ponds, which can be problematic. We'll cover that. But tell us more about the biology of this, to call it this weed.
Well, cattail is the plant that almost everyone can recognize. We actually have 4 different species in the United States: the broadleaf cattail, narrowleaf cattail, southern cattail, and then there's a hybrid that is from the broadleaf and the narrowleaf combination. The broadleaf and the southern cattail are native. The narrowleaf is thought to have originated in Europe and has been transported to the United States. But the cattail seems to be a species that is now considered invasive in some locations. It can have both good and bad characteristics. I think most people only look at the things from a negative perspective, but it's certainly found everywhere. It seems to be taking over in some large wetland systems. And after research, folks have decided that's probably because of the nutrient accumulation in those water bodies and wetland areas, primarily of nitrogen and phosphorus. That's leading to overabundance of cattails. As many people know, cattails are already fairly aggressive, due in part to the nutrient enrichment from ag runoff and from the alteration of our watersheds. But it's also because of the way it disperses and repopulates areas.
It's quite prolific, you say.
Yeah, in the summer, late summer, cattail releases as many as 700,000 wind-dispersed seeds that can travel more than a half a mile in distance. Thus, it can colonize distant aquatic habitats, wetland areas quite easily. After that colonization, then the cattails grow very quickly. It can grow quite large and spreads rapidly, not only from seeds but also from rhizomes. It has some unique characteristics that make it a plant that's well adapted for that type of environment. It can grow fairly tall. Its growth is really inhibited when water levels rise or fall, so it does best in shallow water bodies. But it's not as efficient at uptaking nutrients as some other species, but it seems to do quite well in water bodies that are nutrient rich. And that's the type of environment I see many farm ponds in here in Kansas. We've got farm ponds that are starting to have lots of nutrients because they're stopping those nutrients from flowing down watershed with the pond embankment itself. They get richer and richer over time. As the cattails start to grow, they're uptaking nutrients, but then those nutrients are deposited back into that water body. So it continues to get richer and richer. With the addition of livestock walking down the sides of pond banks, we reduce the water depth, and cattails can grow in water depths at least to 6 feet or so. So we're starting to see our ponds shallow up in the state. They're becoming richer with nutrients, and one of the results of that is increased cattail growth.
Now, before we get into means of dealing with cattails overrunning a farm pond, do they have any beneficial sides at all?
Oh, yes. They're a species that does a good job of stabilizing pond banks. They trap silt. There's indigenous people who use parts of the plant for a wide range of products, including food and medicine. It's provided forage and shelter for animals, including livestock. Muskrats really relish cattails. It can be used in wetland remediation, and it breaks down and removes waterborne contaminants. It can be harvested and used for energy production, biofuels or compressed fuel pellets. It's been used for compost and livestock bedding. It was used for life jackets in World War II. So the plant has a long history of being utilized, but the sheer numbers of acres of the plant and its invasive attributes seems to be the main cause for people wanting to get rid of it.
Well, then, when they do get out of hand, cattails begin to become more than just a nuisance. What to do about them, and one can look at several means from mechanical to chemical and everything in between.
Yeah, if you want to control cattails, you've got to disrupt the root system. And you can do that through lots of different management techniques. It can be cutting, it can be hand pulling, it can be dredging, or the use of chemicals. Although many people don't like to think of the work involved with hand pulling, it works well as a preventative technique before the pond is completely overtaken, but it's much easier to pull them out of a pond when the cattails are young rather than when they're well established and have lots of rhizomes. You just grab them at the base of the plant, kind of wrap your fingers around the roots and pull it out slowly, and then deposit it up on the bank where it dries out. Cutting is another technique that works in some situations. You need to cut them in May, but cutting them in May stimulates that growth, so wait till a little later on in the summer if you're only going to cut once. If you cut them under the water level with something like a trimmer where water is over the top 2 or 3 inches, there are very few cattails are going to grow back in the following year. Dredging, I really don't like to see that as done as purely a means of cattail control, but many of the ponds are probably in need of dredging in order to increase their useful lifespan. So that's a technique that often gets done as well. And then the use of chemicals. Most people want that magic product that they can spray one time and get good reduction in plant growth. And there are several products out there. 2 of the main ones that are used are diquat and glyphosate. The glyphosate product works well at the higher labeled rates, which are up to about 5 pints per acre. It's a product that seems to have widespread appeal. It's fairly inexpensive, and when added with a surfactant, seems to do a fairly good job of controlling cattails.
Well, there's some background on cattail growth in aquatic locations like farm ponds, and what can be done about it if once more it gets to be out of control. Charlie, we appreciate the word. Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And once again, our time is away. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.